Workforce Innovation Board. I'm happy to be here this morning on our fourth and final Tuesday board webinar, welcoming all of the attendees to the session. I'm hoping for a very dynamic, discussion-rich meeting. We're going to be talking about the workforce board building in a couple of different contexts. One is really your roles related to required tasks and activities that come out of the legislation, but that's kind of a small piece. Really how it is that you fulfill these roles, what kind of leadership activities and traits that we're hoping to bring to bear and that are required for a successful board and successful leadership on the board. And then we're going to drill down on some of the operational details of the board itself, how the board is operating, just to give ourselves the opportunity, and perhaps we could call it a luxury, to step back, think about the board, how the board has been running, and what we might want to consider for revisions or new ideas for different aspects of the operations of the board. So that's essentially what we're talking about this morning. I mean, I think Pam and her staff really want your role to be manageable. They want you to feel that you're value added and that you're value gained in terms of your participation. High expectation that you contribute your expertise with maximum participation as a board member. We want to make sure that this experience individually for board members and collectively as an organization, that it's meaningful and impactful. That's kind of the introductory comments for the presentation today. Let's review the discussion topics. Let me start with kind of some general caveats, and Pam and any of the other board members chime in along the way, especially related to your experience. But I think board members need to, if they aren't already, be very aware that there's no expectation that any board member is 100% knowledgeable in all areas related to the board's contextual role, legislation, and requirements and regulations. Not expecting every board member to be able to contribute in all areas. I'm going to just do a mute all here. And that's why we have a board. We have the opportunity to bring expertise that covers a variety of leadership traits and skills and arenas across the community. So there really isn't an expectation of 100% knowledge of 100% of the board activities, but hopefully we'll devise ways to make sure that board members have access to enough information and context so they really can be a dynamic participant. They can participate in conversations and really draw out the issues and clarify what's going on and the data that's being used and the analysis, and then also make really informed decisions and votes when voting is an activity. So we're going to be briefly reviewing the overview of changes related to your board that are embedded in the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. I am a shortcutter, so I will be saying WIOA when I mean that piece of legislation passed a couple of years ago, and we're especially in Illinois, really in full force implementing lots of drill down details of that. So just an overview of the changes in the legislation and its impact on the board. And then we're going to walk through some of the leadership dynamics, and then relate some of the new functions within the legislation and the regulation to the committees. We'll ask you to think about what committee you're on and how this Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act has added to, changed, or revised your committee roles. And then some of the actual operational dynamics of the board, especially focusing on communication and networking, and ensuring that we see our role as representative of, and making sure that we are representing a community of voices as opposed to an individual. Really making sure that your stewardship and your role as ambassador is reflective of a broader voice in the community, that you have capacity to negotiate on behalf of the community that you're representing. Making sure you really understand that your resource gatherers, your investors, and you're obligated to maximize that investment for good return on investment. So thinking about the board roles, how we can improve them, board roles and operations, how we can improve them, evaluate and measure the board, its impact, and our outcomes. Really, how is the board doing itself in addition to the other roles that you have in relationship to the board? Okay, let me just open the mics for a minute. Any questions or comments on the agenda?
So, including Linda Burt, one of our co-chairs, so we're happy to have her.
I'm sorry, Pam, could you repeat that? I had you on mute. I'm sorry.
Oh, so okay. I said I just wanted to mention that we have a few more board members who have joined us, including one of our co-chairs, Linda Burt.
Excellent. Okay. Welcome to everybody. Okay, so let's move on. Let's just do a high-level, excuse me, I'm going to mute all the phones again. Could individuals check their phones, personal and office phones, to make sure you're on mute? Perfect, that's better. Okay. Mute everybody, sorry. Okay, so in terms of contextual change between and again, let me just fill out my acronyms here because I am a shortcutter, but I want to make sure I don't lose people in the conversation. These are two pieces of legislation. For about 15 years, I think it was, we were all operating under the auspices of the Workforce Innovation Act. Is that what the I stands for? I can't even remember anymore. I've been calling it WIA for so long that I can't even remember. Anyway, WIA got extended year after year, and then in 2 years ago, with a lot of support on both sides of the aisle, they passed the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, WIOA. So I am just going to unmute. Okay. So at the strategic level, it's really more about strategy, regional strategy especially, and less about operating programs, although that's included as a significant role for the board and the board members, really moving to make sure we're at the strategic macro level system building. State and regional plans are aligned with the state plan and lead to a coordinated local plan. More around core programs. So they've taken a look at the public workforce system, and they've defined kind of really the core. I like to call them, if you visualize a mall, these are the anchor stores in the mall, and really figuring out how these anchor stores work together to make sure the mall and its outreach and service delivery to all of the community is very effective. So a lot more integration, impact on the performance measure. System building is a big thing. We're going to see it throughout today. And it's really talking about the difference between kind of all the component pieces of the public workforce development system and those taken as a whole, and really seeing ourselves as at a 2.0 system building level in the local area. And by 2.0, I mean a lot of what's in the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act is not new. It's more detail or more specific requirements if we didn't get far enough under the WIA legislation. And it's a study of not only programs and strategies that were seeded through grants over the last 15 years, but it's really a study of kind of continuous improvement, promising practices, what works, and then capturing that and integrating it into both the legislation and the regulation. And then the emphases, just a few that I want to call out, are really again, taking these promising practices and embedding them into the legislation and the regulation for a better return on investment, for a better opportunity to really target the margins of the workforce. So a lot of, under WIOA, we were a lot of sort of more universal and more mainstream focused. And I think one of the biggest changes in WIOA is it really puts us back out into the world of targeting, especially individuals with disabilities or barriers to employment, out-of-school youth. So it's really putting us back into a focus on kind of key targets. And I will tell you, you're one of the few boards that I've seen in quite some time that actually has a committee focused on targeted populations. So it's really nice to see. And then work-based training, we've talked a lot about that, but that's definitely a big theme within the legislation. So that's kind of a brief overview of a comparison between WIA and WIOA. All right, anything to add? Does anybody have anything to add about with the switches? Okay, so we'll move on. So let me just present essentially some research. Again, this is the trend of studying what works and analyzing what the component parts and the success indicators are. And this is over the last 15 years of the work of the WIA boards, a series of observations from a number of different evaluations of what's really critical to make, and this is a study of boards that have tremendous impact and or tremendous power and or tremendous reach and are very successful. And these are 6 of the indicators that they have found that make leaders in the workforce system, which would obviously include board members, make you more successful. And here's what helps your board to have the greatest impact, the most significant kind of power and reach. So adopting a wide-angle point of view, really looking for new ways to enhance and apply your resource and expertise. Focusing on the community, which is really taking you more broadly, relating yourself to the workforce development system and not specifically to what limits your role by focusing only on the regulation or the what's listed in the law for your role and your duties. Building diverse networks, really collaborating and creatively using these networks alongside the task force and the board. Making sure, again, that you take seriously this role as representative of a voice in the community. Embracing openness, making sure that leadership role is well shared across the board, across the board members, across the board staff. Using lots of ways to reach out into the community, social technologies, for example, and we'll talk about some of them as potential tools and resources for you. Encouraging experimentation. I think a lot of the government side of the board role has such a focus on success that it's never seen as a continuous improvement or an R&D environment where we really expect the test to have both positive and negative outcomes. And to that extent, a lot of times when something is tested and there's any negative outcome, the typical kind of public sector approach to that is the glass half full. And we have a lot of experience. Anybody who's been in the system for a while knows the saying, we tried that before. But we try something and it has any amount of failure, we usually abandon the whole thought, idea, and strategy. So we really have to go back to a role of encouraging experimentation, understanding that when we're testing in the R&D world, we have both positive and negative. And when we find what doesn't work around a strategy we're testing, we focus on improving those pieces and not abandoning the whole event. Adding unique value, really you as a person on the board, what contribution you can make to impact the community in a community-wide way. And a lot of focus on next generation leaders, and we'll talk about that, especially in relationship to membership. But seeing leadership all over the community related to the work of the board and the voices in the community and the people that in the community that you meet in relationship to both to your own work and to the board's work. So this is, and I'll just use my mouse to point on the bottom here, a really good study for those of you interested in kind of understanding what are the characteristics and what makes a board effective. This is a good study to take a look at. Embedded in the legislation is a generic list, a limited list of what is the purpose of the local board, and I'm using this for contextualization, but I know Pam and your board well enough to know you've gone essentially far and beyond the specific role that they call out for you in the legislation, the regulation, which is allowed and encouraged. But this is really kind of the base or the foundation of what's required for the local board. And I think probably chief among them is to promote economic growth. By the way you study, improve, and strengthen the workforce development system, the partners, the providers, the programs, the employment and training components, how it is that you steward or marshal those to continuous improvement and strengthening strategies, and then you align them to promoting economic growth. The second bullet here is a pretty important one too. It's really a convener role and a promoter role and a broker role to make sure that the relationships across the community exist and you have the capacity to align the economic, education, workforce, and government partners so that these relationships are effective. And these partnerships are really dynamic, and they're more than they're a noun, they're a verb. It's nonstop networking around issues and challenges through this networking. So I think this is a pretty important role here. And then certainly kind of operational roles. Again, making sure you are representing a community of voices with your seat on the board and establishing a platform in which many of these voices get to speak through you. And certainly then within the board, all members actively participate and collaborate. And I think that's a key dynamic for a workforce board. And then there's just kind of what we're going to drill down to talk about today, how your board becomes even more effective by having clear roles and responsibilities, procedures and expectations, some of which are expressed through your bylaws. Making sure you're agile and proactive, especially related to board turnover, which is through the years has been a challenge for most of the local workforce investment boards. Making sure we increase board participation in general, and specifically, I know actually through the work of your board, Pam was telling me, making sure that board members can participate even when they can't physically attend the meeting. And I know Illinois has specifically allows and has addressed that, which is fabulous. Improving your functionality and ensuring that the public is informed. So this is kind of the foundation built within the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act that talks about the purpose of the local board. But beyond that, there's a bigger way to see your role. And I like this is from the Social Policy Research Associates to this fabulous collection of training resources, and I will just point them out here. They're linked on the bottom of this PowerPoint. If you do not have the PowerPoint slides yet, I know Joanne has sent them out and specifically can resend them to any individual who didn't get them. But they have a series of training modules called Creating Highly Effective Workforce Boards. And I like the thinking about your board having impact and success in these three arenas. So they describe it as kind of a primary role of grant stewards, and then a major role of system builder and regional backbone. And the grant steward is through your must-do roles, the resources, open processes, budgeting, effective structure of your board, literally the management, and then making sure you're doing all the must-dos required within the legislation and regulation. And then these kind of elective roles are system builders and regional backbone. And the system builder is creating these strategic partnerships, an environment of collaboration, not just around funding, but certainly for design and operation of the workforce development system, seeing kind of the community issues as relating to your work and not just those under your grant stewardship. And then beyond that, even a bigger picture, a much more long-term view, sort of your system builder is your wide angle, and the regional backbone is really the longer-term view of positioning and leveraging towards solutions and community advancement. So I really like thinking about your role in these three ways. And as we move to talking about the committees and committee work, I think we can align them back to those three roles. And I find that most of your committees really are focused on system building, which is a really good place to be. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I also wanted to just visit for a moment the clear distinction between, and I'm sure all the board members understand this, but again, I wanted to set it into context for today, the clear distinction between leadership and management. And we need both. We need leaders who are good managers, and we need managers who are aspiring to become more creative and visionary and put themselves on a leadership track. But specifically within the board role, primarily your leadership is required. Being visionary, really asking yourself, what does the economy and the workforce look like in North Central Illinois? How do you define your global competitiveness, and what talent pipelines do you need? What career pathways do you need? So really visualizing and having a picture of what the economy and the workforce looks like down the road, and then illustrating that to motivate, really setting and communicating that vision, drawing the picture and having that illustration motivate participation around the vision, figuring out the path and documenting that path and making sure it's strategic and forward-thinking. There's regional and local planning responsibilities, and just been through that, so it's behind you for the time building. But strategic planning is really, it's not a document that sits on a shelf. It's a very dynamic kind of process for this cycle that continues to repeat itself over and over again. Really marshaling the resources, directing and deriving on the path, and making sure that everything is aligned and then pointing in the right direction. Then doing a check on and a check in and a check up, and really having evaluation and progress review and analysis of milestones and outcomes along the way as part of your role as a leader, making sure you embrace kind of the tune-up, making sure you are revising the plan to meet not only the changing economics, but the changing resource environment, and the changing needs of employers over time in relationship to the definition of the skilled workforce that they need. So it's really making sure, again, contextually, that we have our leadership hats on, that we're at this macro level of vision, strategy, planning, implementation, resource alignment, and continuous improvement as a primary way to sit in that seat on the board. And to do this version of leadership, you need to have this. I mean, if you're writing your resume and you're thinking of action verbs, and for me, I spent a lot of time editing resumes on the side and really getting people to understand kind of powerful action verbs that describe their work. These are the ones that I think are critical to the leadership roles that are played on the local board. So this is the board member's resume for the board job, which is scanning, relying on data and analysis of data and what data tells you about what your workforce, what your employers need, and what skills and workers that you need, convening the right people and organizations and aligning them, prioritizing and goal setting, because the work is endless. The workforce development and economic development are permanent, dynamic activities in a local, region, and state, and on the national perspective. But really making sure you have capacity based on your scan and bringing the right partners together to prioritize and set goals, and then to align around those, facilitate the implementation of those, creating infrastructure wherever needed, removing any barriers to success. Deploying and providing the right resources, including fundraising if the resources you have are too restricted or not enough to get the work done, and then evaluating. So these are the roles that describe that leadership cycle that I had on slide 7. All right, so let me just check in. Anybody have, again, I'm just doing kind of a contextualized version of the board role, the leadership, the activities required. Any questions? We're going to go into conversation now. We're going to move into discussion of the committees by function and understanding what new roles or new requirements for committees might be related to WIOA. Okay, anything to add? Anybody? Question, comment? Everybody is unmuted.
Well, this is Pam. I'd like to think that our committees, you know, when you review the roles and responsibilities of the committees, kind of line up with these roles that you've presented, Melanie. And it'll be kind of a good test for us to check and make sure that they do, because they certainly all make sense.
Right. It's you know, it's why, Pam, I think you and your board decided to, of the topics you could have chosen for a webinar, you chose this as one of 4, because that's what this opportunity really is, you know, we get our head down, we write a plan, we get our head down, we're focused on kind of the work at hand, the agenda of the meeting, and this is an opportunity to kind of step back and get back on the macro level for about ourselves in a much more bigger picture with a wide angle lens, and then just ask, you know, what else can we do to improve board operations. So I don't think this is new information. I think we're just going to do a brief highlight of what might have changed for committee role based on the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act passing, and then kind of give you an opportunity to, based on, so first of all, you know, which committee are you on? Put yourself in that chair for a minute as an individual representative of a voice in the community on a committee with a very particular assignment of task and responsibility, and as a board member. That's kind of the lens to talk about these committee roles. How has your role been the same or changed over time? And as we think about the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, and again, it's really driving the workforce development system, board funding, and alignment around a more strategic collection of opportunities. So how might your role be changing? And many of you are on other boards, so at least we can do a comparative analysis of how other boards work or don't work, what works on another board that I sit on that I might want to bring in as either a role or function and or an operational recommendation for our board. So that's kind of the context. So executive committee assists the board at the most macro level in its mission and moving its work forward, meeting on an as-needed basis to manage the planning process, including the required documentation, but also the overall analysis over time about how the plan is or is not meeting your needs, exploring new funding streams and options, including fee-for-service. And Pam, I took most of this right out of your NCI Works board documentation. A couple I might have changed the wording around, or I raised a question about is the general task that you described mean the same thing that I'm talking about. So I just wanted to be kind of dynamic in relationship to what's new and making sure people understand individual committee roles and then the overlap between the committees. And I think I saw the competitive process and contract approval for the new one-stop operator under the executive committee. So in general, if we're using the grant steward, the system building, and the regional backbone as our 3 arenas for discussing, the executive committee has all 3. Not a lot of specific detail related to grant stewardship, but certainly a tremendous amount of impact on the system building function, and certainly really the architect and probably the committee most mindful about being the regional backbone. So questions or comments on the executive committee? I understand this is made up of some unique members and the chairs of your other committees. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
So some of the new stuff, OneStop Operator will come up this year. This is the fourth bullet here. This will come up this year, and it's just a new requirement to make sure that the mall manager, as it were, I like to use that analogy of the mall and the anchor stores being the core programs. And the one-stop operator is essentially the mall manager, kind of in charge of operating the system of workforce development, and that has a new requirement in the legislation. So the Oversight Committee, if we're using grant steward, system building, and regional backbone, this really is the Grant Steward Committee. This is the group that mostly are responsible for the list of required fiscal evaluation, kind of identification issues, performance in the WIOA. So reviewing performance requirements and overseeing the anchor stores, performance reports, new requirements and process related to performance negotiation, spearheading. This is of the many grant steward functions, this one really takes this committee, the Oversight Committee, extends its role beyond grant stewardship to put it solidly in a system building role. And that's really how is it that the anchor stores in the mall, these core program partners, and all of the other boutiques and kiosks in the mall have a way to share data. It's a really critical piece of a success indicator and a really big challenge now. So the Oversight Committee, in addition to its grant steward function, has a very significant system building role, which is this integrated reporting system, and it has legs and length to it. It's a very significant assignment. Developing evaluation tools, new requirements specifically in the legislation. The board will be required to certify the system. You might do a triage. You might certify centers. You might certify one-stop operators. You might certify the system. So you'll have a new obligation there in terms of developing new methods based on state and other local CEO contributions. And then making sure, you're running this is supposed to be double L, sorry about the typo there, a tight ship in relationship to fiscal responsibilities. So mostly grant stewardship and some overlap into system building. Again, I'm using this discussion and these analogies to have people really think about what committee I am, what expertise do I bring, how is our committee working, how is our board working. So any questions or comments on the Oversight Committee?
Well, this is Pam, and I just want to point out, particularly for any of our newer members, the Executive Committee is going to be responsible. One of the new things under WIOA is to make sure that all of the core partners, the anchor stores, as Melanie refers to them, make sure that all of our plans that we have to turn in to our state level agency, we have to make sure that all of our plans align, that we're not going in different directions, but rather we're all on the same page. And so one of the things is for the Executive Committee is when they're reviewing the plans for submission, they make sure of that. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask those core partners, the anchor stores, to provide summary reports and kind of progress reports to the Executive Committee and or the full board. And then the Oversight Committee comes in and makes sure that we're all doing what we said we're going to do. They're going to review the progress as we go. So that's kind of, how that whole thought process went in terms of those two boards or committees and interacting.
Right. Well, so really solidly set in the system building function of the board, kind of across the whole system. The alignment is key. On so many levels, the alignment is key, and you're going to end up with more bang more bang for your buck. So any questions on either of those committees? All right, let's move on to both the OneStop Partner Committee and the Business Liaison and Marketing Committee. So the OneStop Partner Committee is everybody at the mall, to just take my analogy and keep moving it forward. It's the core programs, which would be anchor stores at the mall. It's any of the, the big chain stores that have a store in every mall, other programs that run all across the state. And then there's locally specific kind of boutiques, any of the community-based organizations that are unique, like with Vanessa, are unique to your Tri-County area. So it's all of these people together calling themselves OneStop Partners, and this committee is the voice for that group of people. And they provide guidance and oversight for the system and the partners. So they're kind of working together. They will have a one-stop operator that actually is the day-to-day mall manager, but this committee works together to oversee this whole system, set priorities for the system, make sure they're driving it and directing it in an aligned, strategic way. I think career pathways goes here. I think my question mark here, I think I was using that if I didn't see it specifically called out, but that I thought it might fall into the responsibility of a committee. Shared cost negotiation and MOU, basic career services, basic business services. So really, what is the menu of services at the mall and across the mall, and which ones do we share in common and which ones are unique? The memorandum of understanding among the partners about how we'll pay for this mall, how we'll run this mall, how this mall will work, how this mall will perform successfully, and how we'll report on that together. And then recommending the role of the one-stop operator. So really, how do we define the mall manager within our system? So let me stop there because I did raise this question. Is this where I saw career pathways in a couple other places, Pam, and I want to speak to the fact that it's multiple committees might have responsibility, but will the One-Stop Partner Committee also be working on that?
Yes, and we kind of fell back on the old language of the core and intensive training services. We should have probably updated the language to career pathways for sure. And where we say in there overseeing the one-stop part or the one-stop system, that kind of includes all of those, the career pathways, journey mapping, business services, things like that.
Perfect.
And certainly the MOU part of it. So yes, you're absolutely correct.
So this is what I like about the way you describe the function of the One-Stop Partner Committee is it's some of the required grant steward sort of roles, some of the mandatory things that need to get done by the board, but it has a tremendous amount of system building roles built into it. And I think this is a good point in time in the presentation to point out that most of your committees have really solidly moved to tasks that are system focused, system building focused. So it's a great place to see kind of all of the committees working and operating. The Business Liaison and Marketing Committee has one of what I think is a key role. They're responsible for marketing efforts of the board and of the one-stop system. They recruit and onboard new members and the required for orientation. A very, very key function for this. And then really have a job of recognizing and identifying business and industry partners who participate in the system. So very big role. It's a system building with some sort of regional backbone. So it steps beyond even the local system and it broadly at the community and these two functions. Three additional ones to talk about. Your Employer Engagement Committee develops and implements promising strategies for meeting the skill needs of employers and workers in your area. This is where the development of sector strategies probably will become a big part of what this board does. And I did put a question mark there because, again, the description had a function and task described that way. And I just wanted to, since we've had a nice conversation through these many webinars on sector strategies, I just was borrowing that language. They're really the link between the board and economic development agencies and the local business community. So employer engagement kind of a voice out and bringing a lot of the board's work out and across the community. Again, then to bring it back and make sure it's aligned. And I really think the work-based training, I specifically added it here because there's going to be a lot of policy development on work-based training, and I think you want, at a minimum, the Employer Engagement Committee perhaps taking the lead on some of the design features and then handing it over to the OneStop Partner Committee. But I have a couple here where I'm wondering, Pam, if you see these functions related to this committee, or if the committee chair is on the phone and wants to also weigh in on this discussion.
Yeah, I would certainly, ask others to weigh in on it as well, and then I can always comment at the end.
Is this where you see kind of the work-based training, kind of the macro view of work-based training, maybe starting here with the engagement design attached to it, and then it moves maybe to the OneStop Partner Committee for the actual implementation detail?
Yes, and again, when we look at the specifics on how we've identified the roles in our bylaws to enable NCI works to identify workforce issues affecting the local business community. So that's kind of the broad umbrella under which a lot of these sector-based strategies, work-based learning strategies, all of those are kind of going to be taken into account under that big umbrella.
Right. So again, Pam, I just thought we've been using these specific terminologies through the webinar series. So I saw that you put it there. I just wanted to call out the terminology that we've been exploring through these webinars and just kind of land it squarely in the committee name. So the target
that's a good point. That's a good point, Melanie. We'll go through and kind of insert the current language and make sure that we follow your suggestions, because again, they're very good ones. So we can make those changes.
Okay, well, and again, I wanted to kind of link the overall webinar series. So the Targeted Population Committee, I'm very pleased to see you're one of the few boards that actually has a committee who's focused on targeted populations. And it's a good idea, especially at this point in time. The Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act makes a very big distinction and a very big shift from universal access and a universal population to really calling out a list of individuals with barriers to employment, and they itemize that list so that people are very clear that instead of just a mainstream workforce development system, that the public funds are to embrace kind of the full margin of the workforce. So individuals with disabilities, veterans, ex-offenders, other populations facing special challenges, and so that work is really going to be dynamic. Work-based learning, input, and cooperation, because work-based learning is a fabulous strategy for targeted populations. And then so this is kind of a grant stewardship one. There's a very specific requirement around ADA compliance. And then there's really the system building piece, which is work-based learning. And then Youth Committee is focused on challenges for the youth. So this group will switch to really the out-of-school youth focus and investments. And there's an increase in required services. There's 4 or 5 new services that have to be contracted for and delivered. And youth especially, I think, benefit from career pathways. So you see career pathways kind of covering multiple committees' work. Policies and providers, and emphasize again, and work-based training comes up in a lot of different places. So some of these strategies will affect multiple committees. And that said, I wanted to make sure you have the, I think you do this, but at least give you the opportunity to understand that when you have a overlap, like work-based training or career pathways, it's an event related. It's development of something new. It has kind of a start and end before the ongoing maintenance. And it requires kind of a startup focus or intent that you might consider task force. So a task force on work-based learning, which should be members of multiple committees because it crosses multiple committees, and then a big reliance on sort of outside expertise to complement that, or a task force on career pathways, or task force on some of the other kind of short-term intense startup focused issues. So any questions or comments on committees? I'm hoping people just took a little bit of time to see what all of the work of the committees are, and to make sure you're in a place where it will be most meaningful to you, where your skill set is the most value added. I'm not suggesting a lot of jumping around on committees, but I think that dynamic is always a possibility to make sure the right members are on the board, and the right board members are on the right committees where they really can make what they believe to be the best impact. So that is kind of an ongoing dynamic for the board and for the committees to review. And I want to move from sort of structure into board operations. Any final thoughts on committees? Al, Beth, Berta, Diana, Rhonda, Linda, Sarah, Susan, Teresa, Vanessa, Bob. Anybody have additional comments? Okay, so let's move into, and again, I want to make semantic, really effective and efficient board operations. I've been on a lot of boards that I thought were effective, but I never necessarily thought they were efficient, and a lot of boards that were efficient, but they weren't necessarily being effective. And I'll just leave it that in the semantic, the observation of that, but really making sure that you have some way of paying attention to the board operations themselves and asking yourself, are they effective and efficient? So we want to improve our functionality. We want that to be a standard operating procedure for how we run ourselves as a board, as committees, and as board members, compared to other boards and our roles in other boards, and how it is that our organization can thrive. So some of the guidelines to optimize, and I would actually almost recommend text on this, and some of these might be bylaws issues, but some of them might just be, here are the guidelines for the board operations for NCI Works. And so there's a section maybe on each of these bullets, one on membership that really talks about how key the membership is and how it is that one becomes a member and what the expectations are for each member. I know some of this is included in your bylaws, but again, reviewing it, making sure it's really dynamic. I like to recommend that any board member who is considering a departure, kind of weighing your time availability, your expertise, and maybe your other obligations and thinking it's time to leave, that maybe one of the expectations of board members is that any board member who is announcing their departure is expected to leave 2 or 3 recommendations of people who might make good board members behind. So you're thinking about your membership as a way to expand the leadership and reach out to maybe developing new leaders, which is one of the functions we talked about early. So how it is that membership is key. I have another slide to talk a little bit more about that. How it is that you want to make sure that all board members have enough information to participate and effectively vote or weigh in on decisions for actions that require that. So again, I've been at a lot of board meetings where a committee will report and the committee has clear understanding and they take it to large-scale vote. And I'm sure this doesn't happen at NCI Works, hopefully you like a little sarcasm. But you can tell there's a number of board members who really have no idea what they're even talking about, let alone have capacity to represent a voice, a community of voices in that proceeding. So how it is we spend more time, not a lot more time, but more time making sure there's comprehension on these key issues when they're on the agenda, and making our goal that every board member, if surveyed, would say, I had enough information to participate in the discussion and to effectively vote on issues that came up for a vote. Another either and or, what is our expectation on both attendance, which is a separate issue, and maybe more a very distinct one on participation. So again, you've got your law in Illinois that allows for board members to participate in board committee meetings and board meetings, not all in the same room. It's not the, so that definitely addresses the attendance issue, but really what is the expectation around participation, and how do we really hold each other accountable for bringing our expertise to bear? Communications and networking go together. So what are our processes for communicating across the board, among the board members, and within the committee structures? And we're going to talk a little bit more on that. I have a couple of slides that call out some of these individually. And I think the overlap between communications and networking is pretty clear. How is it that we use communications strategies called networking to really maximize the input and feedback from employers and the public and customers and stakeholders and experts? And what does it mean to have ensured the right amount on the timeliness of input and feedback on issues that come before the board? Again, this may or may not be a document that sits within your board documentation that are the guidelines on how your board intends to maximize these. So I'm just giving a little bit more description and some suggestions. Productivity really is around, meeting management. What happens in advance, what happens during, what happens after. I think frequency of meetings and length of agenda is something that board staff and committee chairs regularly struggle with, but I think there's probably a lot more 30, 45, 60-minute kind of discussion opportunities that are separate from required board activities that might make participation productivity go up, because we're drilling down to chewable pieces of dialogue and discussion, and manageable amounts of requests for input and feedback. So again, another thing to think of. What are our guidelines around research and development, allowing for testing, allowing for a certain amount of failure as an outcome of the test, making it a standard operating procedure that whenever we want to start something, and I know this is Pam's sort of regulars, who else is doing it? Who else is doing sector strategies? Who else is doing career pathways? And using someone in front of you to inform what, how, who, you do it yourself. And then fundraising, we had a whole, I thought, fabulous webinar on fundraising. But I think, again, you might want to document an expectation around the role of fundraising for board members, the board as a whole, and maybe individual committees. So this is just a list of board operations that I think are most critical to your success, and getting real clear about saying out loud and maybe even documenting your expectations of each other as individuals and your expectations as a body around these key criteria for your operations. So you have some of these, right? You have some kind of understanding on membership, attendance, participation, communications, yes? Nessa, Teresa, Susan, Sarah, Linda, anybody want to chime in?
Well, this is Linda. I know we, a couple times in the last several years, and Pam could probably attest to it, we have actually, in the interest of transparency, put out a spreadsheet to show the attendance or lack thereof of certain board members. And when we did reorganize and consolidate two workforce areas, I think Pam put a lot of thought into those board members that would actually actively participate. Showing up. So, I think your point is well taken. They have to be engaged.
Right.
So,
well, and representing a voice, representing a community of voices. So it's not only I didn't hear from you, I didn't hear from the community of voices you represent at this table. So it's a very big responsibility, and what is our expectation and how do we hold each other accountable for that? So thanks, Linda. Anybody, any other folks?
This is Pam. I just want to add a couple things. First of all, you're absolutely correct. And Linda, and I think we have a pretty good, pretty active board. They tend to attend meetings, and which again is where a lot of our work is done. We've talked about maybe streamlining the meetings themselves by going to a consent agenda. So that's something we may want to look into. And then one thing just this last week, last Thursday, the workforce board directors from across the state had a conference call led by one of our directors, and we're sharing information on what boards across the state are doing in terms of membership agendas, all the board structure issues. So that's going to be a lot of very valuable information to have.
That's excellent. Well, and so now we've opened discussion, and as an awesome key staff member to the board, Pam's going to find lots of information to plug into these different board operation issues that we're talking about. That's fabulous, and I'm glad to hear that, Pam. Go Illinois, you know what I mean?
You bet.
So membership is key, but and participation is paramount. And I've always said those are really two of the driving forces around board operations for me. Getting the right membership and developing the membership ongoing. So this sits within the business liaison and marketing committee, and I just want this committee to make sure they see this as an ongoing dynamic issue. These first two here. I mean, for example, setting goals to cultivate 5 or 6 new board members annually, and literally cultivate that, and understanding that the law tells you the minimum number of members, but complementing your board with additional business members, for example, helps your meet your quorum. It helps make for the business voice to always be at the table when some business members can't attend. So there's a minimum requirement. But I think if you're cultivating 5 to 6 new members annually, then you have opportunities to start them as a key advisor, for example, a key advisor to a committee, invite them to committee meetings and have them have an advisory role, and then maybe move them onto task forces to actually get their feet wet and to dive into the very issue-specific opportunity to help the board related to their expertise, and then maybe adding them to boards. So really seeing membership as a very dynamic kind of ongoing process where we're cultivating members and we're building opportunities to get them attached to the board in progressive steps. In addition to, we have a vacancy and we bring new members on. And then engaging them in key decisions. I'm really talking about that as a becoming a member cycle. So membership is key and participation is paramount. And I think you already have very empowered chief executive and staff. I'm always impressed with Pam. And just do a couple of drill downs on communication and a couple of drill downs on networking. This is going to run over an hour, but I am making a recording of this. So if anybody has to leave, we're sorry to see you go, but I'm going to continue making the presentation so that your board has a pretty solid webinar to use for the purposes of onboarding new members and informing them and using to draw back on. So some of the communication issues are really how's it going and what works, and what we would recommend related to method or frequency or distribution. So what are our specific, how does our board staff and committee chairs, task force leaders communicate with our members related to meetings and actions? I know you have a pretty solid meeting schedule, so that's never a surprise. I do really recommend you consider consent agenda, and then you use a bigger cycle, a pre-meeting and a post-meeting opportunities to additional required activities, and the meetings themselves perhaps become more productive. And I think that's one of the things, Pam, you'll find out when you're connecting with these other board staff across the state, is the pros and cons of a consent agenda and really weighing it and bringing it in, and whatever might be con about it or a negative possibility out of using a consent agenda, really addressing it before you adopt that style. How to do maybe general updates. Will County has this fabulous economic trends. I think it's maybe monthly. It used to be quarterly. But how do we stay connected to data and stay connected to the trends in the economy and in the business community and in the workforce community? Maybe making sure that Business newsletters are, all the board members are on the chamber newsletter. All of the board members are on the Manufacturing Association's newsletter related maybe to information in your area. Really checking out what kind of information is out there and available and tying ourselves into it and getting some kind of frequency there. How to really use additional ways to be a voice on the board of a larger community. So surveying and polling and focusing groups and public meetings. So this is really reaching out for the input that is not about a board meeting or not about a committee meeting. So we're considering one new format for career pathways. Maybe we poll the education community and we poll the CBOs and we poll some workforce organizations. So increasing input beyond, so these are methods, and then maybe really focusing on employer input beyond the board membership. So making sure we have all kinds of ways for business organizations and business individuals beyond our business board members to have input on occupations in demand and real-time labor market issues. And we have four, I'm making this up, we have 4 competitive grants in front of us. We really get one and handle one. Which of the 4 would you prefer? Just kind of that ongoing dynamics. And it might be that you get a survey tool like SurveyMonkey and you start to cultivate members and key advisors and you put them just into this polling process as the first way you introduce them to the board. Okay, so that's communications. Let me do a little bit on networking, and there is tremendous overlap here, but I just wanted to call those 2 specific pieces of board operations out. So you already talked about switching to the consent agenda, but I think one of the ways to take your voices forward and to stimulate connection and motivation to the work of the board is for board members to take agenda items from board meetings and to put those agenda items on the agenda of other organizations that you're attached to. So it might be a government organization, it might be a business organization, it might be quarterly doing an update to my trade association on the board work and providing some of the highlights of the board activity. So it's a way to network out and take your voice as a board member out to the community at large in at least some information exchange and getting people interested in perhaps following, to use the Twitter word, following the board and the board agenda and the board activity. Again, I talked about creating task forces to harness expertise. It's a great way to cultivate new membership, resources and analysis of promising practices. It's really a very focused way to get a lot of work done in a short amount of time and not have to stretch it out across busy committee agendas. Consider a regional approach to expanding your reach. So polling, surveying, focus groups, I mean, SurveyMonkey is one of my favorite. LinkedIn is a fabulous place to create a community, and within LinkedIn you can do polling, you can have dynamic ongoing conversation, you can create groups within your board, and you can create groups for each committee maybe to draw on, to build surveys into the LinkedIn site. I mean, there's just a lot of GoToMeeting, which is the format we're using today, might be a way to do your networking and reach on beyond. Basecamp is a project management site I like. It's a place where I can post documents and I can click a number of people in my email bank and ask them to comment on the document, and they do so within the document on the site. So there's also this sort of technology piece that's worth exploring. And then just more event-related just-in-time feedback. You know, really trying to get like pop-ups on a website that says, was this article helpful? I'm a trainer. Every time I do training live, especially a full day on-site, every single time I do it, the end of the day has an evaluation, and I get that feedback immediately and constantly. It was a little hard to kind of expect it all along, but you could start having 3-second surveys at the end of each board meeting. How do we do? How do we manage our time? How do we manage our information? Was this valuable? Was it a good use of your time? I mean, there's some dynamics there to consider as well. Okay, so let me stop and let you talk about any of these ideas. Certainly, Pam, chime in about what you're already doing, and then any board members who use these techniques on other boards or like to consider these techniques for your board. So let me just let's have a conversation about the 3 slides we just did.
Well, I can tell you that Diana puts together some labor market information on a quarterly basis. We've been sending that out to all, and not just our members, but to businesses and chambers.
Excellent.
We also do a newsletter, a quarterly newsletter that goes out to our business community and has different events and initiatives and things like that that we're working on. We are just now in the process of getting SurveyMonkey, interestingly enough. So, yeah, I was just thinking of using that for some of the things you were talking about, like, you know, what's the one major challenge they see in their area, or what information would they like to get. Try to get some of that information through those real quick SurveyMonkey or questions or surveys.
Right.
We do an annual report. We do, I think, a good deal of communicating and networking and things. Maybe some of the other members could comment on some of the things that they were thinking of. We do an employer conference. We do an annual banquet.
Nice.
Yeah, we do quite a bit, I think.
This is Linda again. One of the other things that we've done in past board meetings, and I think if we move to the consent agenda, it will free up some time, is we would go around the room and ask the different sectors, what's going on? What are the biggest issues you have in your sector? Because I know healthcare, but I don't know manufacturing. You know, so I always found that to be pretty helpful. Excellent. You know, just because it gave me a better understanding of what other people were dealing with. And all that being said, there was a lot of commonality. I mean, succession planning, you know, was big across all sectors, because we all have the baby boomers that are getting ready, you know, to leave, and taking with them a lot of knowledge, a lot of skills, a lot of experience.
Right.
You know, and a work ethic that is a little different than what we find today.
Right. Yes, you're absolutely right.
What I like about what you're saying, Linda, is there's this real key strategic focus on sector strategies, but there's always the top 10 HR list of human resource issues that tend to cross all kinds of industry and occupational line, and it's really good to find a way to stay current on that as well, because the board could be addressing common HR challenges in addition to really drilling down and focus on a sector. So that was a good point. What do other people like about the board's communication and networking, or your experience in other boards, or something you want to see your board do?
I'm trying to think, because I sit on some other boards. Mostly, we try to run a very efficient meeting. You know, it's my own personal opinion, but I think board meetings should be an hour, not much more, because I think people, it's like you go into a museum and you're saturated after about an hour, hour and a half. And so we really try to keep it, you know, short and sweet, and the salient points. And I think the consent agenda, again, will help us do that, and then allow time for discussion and brainstorming and that cross exchange of information.
Right.
And Linda, there's actually a lot of boards that do use the consent agenda, so I'll be able to get some information and maybe some examples of their agendas.
Yeah, I mean, I sit on a credit union board. I know our hospital board. We have both of those boards have gone to that, just because there's some things that, like minutes, everybody can read. You know, I mean, we don't need to spend a whole lot of time on that. Some of the other things that are pretty, you know, they're not action items, but it's good information to have. You need to do it. So, and even these seminars, actually, you know, we wanted to allow the flexibility for board members to access them at their own time and not have a 2 or 3 hour board meeting, because then we were afraid people wouldn't show up at the board meeting. Right. You know, but this they can do anytime.
Right.
So
Right.
Some of these would also be good discussion items, Linda, for some of our board meetings, or
Absolutely.
even exec. Yeah, maybe exec.
Right. So again, I contrary to a lot of what I see for boards, there's something about the frequency and most museum goers really pick the piece of the museum they want to go to, and then maybe they wander in a couple other rooms, but nobody tries to do a whole, history museum or art museum in one day, or they
Exactly.
So using that, you might do a one-question poll every Friday, and it's 4 minutes, and it's structured in a way to give people an easy way to answer. And then you're really starting to unbundle lots of questions that you, and Pam, you have a natural, instantaneous style of saying, let's find out what the board thinks. Let's find out what our customers think. Let's find out what staff think. So unbundling and making things more frequent is how you expand people's opportunity to participate beyond board meetings and committee meetings. So really thinking about that option and teasing things apart and adding, a lot more. If you're, we're going to have a vote on this, come 20 minutes early if you want a briefing on the issue, and then the board meeting will start at, or stay 30 minutes after. We're going to do some training on something else. Just creating all these optional ways to be informed and increase my capacity to participate. How about other folks? Anything to add in?
This is Linda again. The other thing I appreciate, Pam is very good when things are going on. They're kind of fast moving, or maybe happen between boards. She's very good at emailing all of us, and it becomes sort of a blog. Not really, but it has the essence of that, which takes very little time. You can do it when you have time. Right. It's all out there. It's transparent.
Right. Right.
And it really encourages engagement.
Well, and building on that, to the extent that I found, like, I'm going to name the product that I use, but there are lots of on-site, they're called project management sites, but they're good for documentation management. So instead of, because email doesn't always lend itself because it's back and forth, and I know everybody in the room will be raising their hands when I say, how many times do you want to kill somebody for respond all? There's a way, for example, to use a site like Basecamp to post a document or post a collection of documents that you want feedback on, and you select from your online, people who have an account inside that project management email account, to select who you're sending it to, and they go into the same document and all respond in a place where all of the comments are captured together. So I see everybody's comments, I add my own comments, I comment on other people's comments, that I have a process where I'm collectively running that kind of transaction. And it's a step forward from email when you're talking about that kind of activity where you really want to do an exchange, get some feedback, ask for approval or approval. Another automation tool, an online technology tool that might help you in addition to SurveyMonkey.
It's good to know, Melanie. Thank you.
Susan, Teresa, Vanessa, Beth, Berta, Bob. How you doing, Bob? Can I just check in with your new member? How you doing, Bob?
I'm doing fine. I'm really taking a lot of this in. This is my first exposure to this.
I'm not using too many acronyms, am I?
No, not at all.
Oh, good.
I do have a question, and that is, where do I find the slides in the recording after the meeting?
We will get them out to you, Bob. We'll get them out to everybody.
Okay, so there's not a centralized site?
Well,
yeah. Go ahead,
Not yet, but something like Basecamp, Pam, would be a place where you have your folders, and you have all of your board meetings in one folder, and you have all of your training stuff in another. But they, Bob, the very exciting news, I know Joanne probably wants to plan a little bit more of an announcement. But NCI Works now has a YouTube channel, and that's where we're uploading and using that for a host for everything. So that is going to be the centralized site where certainly all these training webinars go. But you can also use that for your companies that have training videos on, you know, what's it like to work in manufacturing, can also start using your new YouTube, NCI Works YouTube site for really much more dynamic purposes. But yeah, they're pretty good about sending all this stuff up. So the slides and a link to the site for the recordings will be available.
And I took a list of everybody who is on this, and we'll be sure to get the slides to everybody today or tomorrow.
Thank you.
Right. Any other questions, comments? I don't have to spend time on the additional slides, but I do want to raise one final question for you. Is really, so how do you know for sure that you have the best board ever? How do you know that your board is having reach and impact in the ways that you want it to? So what kinds of measures of success do you have or could you build? So I'm using this USDOL, United States Department of Labor's version of a description of success. And it's not really full of metrics, but it certainly could be, you could build milestones around how you would evaluate for these things. But how is it that the NCI Works has a document that says this is our description of success, and here's our process for evaluating it, and here's our position on continuous improvement? So I think maybe that's one more area to recommend. And I do think you did put the board membership as a piece within your business liaison and marketing department, and maybe this is a executive committee function, but really someone on the board has to be focused on board operations beyond Pam, just you and your staff who already do a fabulous job. We want the content of this webinar to be something that the board members are focused on across time, and it might be, you know, annually you do some kind of check-in and check-up, or quarterly or whatever. Okay.
Linda, I think that would be a good role to add to BLM, actually, since that's kind of a membership committee thing.
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay, so this is the final of a series of 4 Tuesday morning webinars that your board selected as a really bite-sized. We went over a few times, but again, I wanted to make sure you had a good recording. But really bite-sized topics, and I think all 4 have been fabulous. The participation has been fabulous. I think, Pam, you and I have found a pretty good way to do a dynamic, participant-rich webinar, because webinars aren't always the top choice for kind of getting information. There is one more webinar offered tomorrow. It's called Advancing Business Services in your area. It will be from 2 p.m. in the afternoon to 3:30 p.m. in the afternoon. I did that right. That
is correct.
So there is one more, and it's really on business services and advancing business services in the public workforce system. And everybody is welcome to attend that. The link is, if you'd like to join us and didn't get the email, again, let Pam or Joanne know. All right, final comments, questions? I would like people on this call, everybody to just mute themselves and just give me some feedback on this or any other webinar you attended to. So can everybody unmute themselves? Right, you're all open. So let's start with Beth, and then we'll go to Diana, and then we'll go to Kathy.
Berta joined us as well, Melanie. I don't know if you have her on your list.
Yeah, I do see. Sorry, Berta and Beth, you have to unmute yourself. You have yourself on mute. Let's go to Diana since she's her mic's open. How are we doing, Diana?
I think very good. I think that for new members and for staff who maybe are not as familiar with the Workforce Board or have had as much contact with those members as I have, that it's been a very good series of orientations, basically. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I like thinking about staff as an audience. Bertha and Beth, could you unmute yourself?
Melly, I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Berta. So, as a new member, I believe, I think it's going to be great. I'm very excited to be part of Pam's team and all that. As for communication and all that with her, everything's been great. She's very, very on top of things, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Glad to have you. You've been a great member, in addition to our committees and our MOU group and things like that. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Pam. I appreciate that. And I must have missed the emails, but this is the fourth one I heard?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and there's recordings of the first three. So.
Okay, great. Pam, whenever you get a chance, if I can please get those, I would love to listen to them.
We're getting them set up one by one. I think the first one is out, Berta. We'll make sure you have that information.
Great, thank you. I really appreciate that. But yeah, I mean, other than that, being a part of the, this board, I think it's going to be great.
Excellent. Beth, can you get this muted if you jump in?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. I'm not exposed to the board meetings that much. I do attend some of the committee meetings, but no, very interesting information here.
Excellent. Let's see, Linda, we heard from you. Susan, Teresa, Vanessa, anybody want to jump in, please?
I'll just jump in. This is Susan. Pam, I appreciate you being allowing me to even be a part of this, because it just helps. I'm not on the board or anything like that, but it helps me to understand the partnerships with like what we talk about with the college and stuff like that, because I do dual credit here at the college. And so this was very interesting to understand. Pam and I've talked about this before. You don't know what the other groups really do, and so this was very interesting. So thank you.
Yeah. And again, you may not be on the board, Susan, but you're certainly a part of the workforce system. So I appreciate the fact you took the time to join us. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you too.
Teresa, Vanessa, anything to add?
This is Teresa, and as a staff member, I think today's call just helped provide a good amount of purpose, role, functions of the board, and how we can better partner. So I appreciate the information.
Excellent. And Vanessa, anything to add?
One of the things, for me, it was just a refresher, which was good. I think one of the things I took away is kind of thinking beyond within ourselves as a board, getting the word out to other boards, other chambers, governments, cities, within our communities about what the WIOA boards are actually doing to make our communities better. I do think that's something we need to strengthen within our board as board members. So that was probably my big takeaway from today, is how do we get the word out about the real work that is being done for the betterment of our communities.
Right. As a board person doing that, not just Pam's good communication.
Correct. Absolutely.
Perfect way to end the webinar. Okay. Any final thoughts? Anybody?
Yeah, this is Bob. One more time.
Bob.
What would help me if this exists is to see an organization chart of the members in their roles.
Perfect.
And I will provide that to you, Bob, when we meet and do the orientation. You'll have a big picture, like all the way starting at Congress and coming all the way down to the local area. And then also you'll have the information for our local area. So you will get all that when we meet. Yep.
Thank you.
You bet. Glad you're looking for it.
You're
Pam, does that sound familiar? Excuse me, Pam, does that sound familiar?
Yes, it does. In fact, the reason we have it is because our board members asked for it, so that's why we have it. And we use it.
So Bob,
Thank you.
let me tell you, I work all over the country, and you're joining one of my favorite boards. So I'm very excited for you.
Oh, great. Thank you. I am too,
Okay,
really.
Okay. Okay, everybody, have a great day.
Thank
you.
Melanie, you too.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Bye.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye-bye.